We will have my slides in a moment.
Yes.
This is the moment for me to say thank you to everybody for inviting me and for coming this late, to listen to my short presentation. While I will be talking about global learning through collaborations, let me start from one important statement, I hope important, about global learning as a global megatrend. Yes. There are many global opportunities for equitable online development and collaboration. And to some degree, we are missing the boat by not grabbing them right now. Let me clarify my position, since it might be slightly different than the position presented by a couple of speakers before. While e-learning is rooted in distance learning and in continuing education, it grew beyond those roots. This is very important practically. Why is it important practically? I followed the Sloan C network mentioned just a moment ago by our colleague from Argentina, by trying to see online learning as at first being able to imitate and approximate the on-campus environment, and next, and we are already at the second stage, exploring also those specific opportunities that online learning allows that are not allowed in the classroom. For instance, the ability to hook up to the distant websites, visit the galleries, as our colleague again presented, or have asynchronous discussion where students can think of their responses much better than in class, and actually all of them participate. So there are clear advantages as well. Why is it not the traditional distance learning model or continuing education model? Why is it not just that model, although it's rooted in it? For instance, the older model had very little room for student-to-student interactions that are very important in learning, and in online learning they are even more important than in on-campus learning actually. Frankly speaking, the organisms that are best in traditional distance learning and continuing education sometimes are missing this aspect. That's how many British universities, including British Open universities, that used to be leaders in distance learning, are not exactly leaders in e-learning at all. They barely do e-learning. That's exactly this path dependency that is very important for us to understand. Since we not always lead, we always follow sometimes, the best examples, it is very important to recognize what those best practices are indeed. But now, one of the Sloan C reports is actually named Moving to the Mainstream. Yes, e-learning is a mainstream activity, and this is essentially important. Yes, in many degrees in the United States are no longer branded e-degrees. Our goal is not just to go in one area, such as community college education, professional education. Our goal is to be present everywhere, including in placement for the strongest graduate programs, PhD programs, or academic jobs. If we are clear about no significant difference, then we should not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, yes? And really follow on that point. Now, here the slide is kind of went ahead of me here, And because the next point also briefly is going to be about blended learning. There is an exception to the no significant difference thesis that I agree is quite old, comes from the 1920s in terms of distance education, and was reinstated and measured very well by the teams, including Karen Swan's teams on the East Coast in the US, that learning outcomes are very similar and qualitatively the same in online and on-campus developments modes. But there is one difference. There are certain activities or certain kinds of abilities that are better online and better on campus. Therefore, if you teach a blended class, you can do two things. When I was teaching my first blended class, I did the wrong thing. I think I've explored the things online that should be done on campus and the things that on campus that should be done online. I think the class was not as good as my online classes. I was already quite good in doing that, or as my on-campus classes. But then I've actually put some work in it, and I can confirm that from my own experience that blended learning, and there is strong research confirming that as well, if done right, and I agree this is quite difficult to do, has actually about 20% stronger learning outcomes than any of the other modes, either online or on campus. Emotive meanings are better conveyed online. By the way, in the last issue of Formamente, there is an excellent article about conveying emotions in online classes, but still we are not quite there. And this is important because emotions are important for learning. So if I want to convey a completely new idea to my students, then I need to say it on campus. Online, they will feel like that's something they've heard on the internet, but they don't really trust it that well. What is better online? Actually, clearly better online. It's focused discussion, where students can actually feel, reflect. I teach business, but I teach also philosophy, and in philosophy, it's really much better to do asynchronous discussions online if students are clear that this is what the class emphasizes on. Of course, if this is just an additional conversation, student-to-student contact with no professor participation, of course, then it's not serious and leads nowhere. All right. One other classification, now pretty common, also endorsed by the Sloan Consortium, but actually I think coming from SUNY, web-enhanced classes are those that use from 1 to 20% of the content based on the web. So for instance, you have an instructor that brings in some slides or hooks up to the web occasionally and shows something there. It's not a blended class, it's a web-enhanced class. There are two kinds of blended classes, actually three. One is between 20 and 50%. This is kind of low blended content, so it's an online class with primarily online activities, but with a clear area in which students focus online. Sometimes those would be discussion groups or some specific projects, yes? Then blended 2 is the blended mode. This explores the strength of both models, but especially slightly probably focused towards online. Then blended 3 is what many people call online already, where you have an online class with 1 meeting or 2 meetings or 17 meetings out of a huge class. It's not an online class, it's a blended class. Why? Because there are some features of online classes, for instance, geographic neutrality or physical state neutrality, that are not really satisfied there. Some of my best students would be paralyzed students. I had 2 excellent graduate students in this area, completely paralyzed. They couldn't go to a blended free class, 99%, but they need to show up once. Sorry, won't happen. Students with very heavy family obligations, students who are not free to go without US visas, incarcerated students, whatever. I mean, only fully online classes are really online classes. And I've said it before, blended are sometimes better in terms of learning outcomes, but they are not online classes, they are blended classes. The three essential freedoms of global learning: freedom to learn, freedom to teach, freedom to hire. Now I'm getting even more controversial. If we are talking about a truly global environment, we need to have those three freedoms. Yes? And I'm not against the business model of university. It doesn't mean freedom to learn without being a student or without paying. It's not necessarily open source, although I like open source as long as practicable. It's fine. Freedom to teach, even more important. Right now, I'm one of the few professors who has geographic freedom. My dean doesn't care where I am physically. I teach online, I do it well, and it's a little easier for me to do it from my campus because of direct access to tech support, but I can be in Rome or in Warsaw or in Athens or somewhere else. And then freedom to hire, even more important. In my department, we have colleagues from Oregon, and we are stationed in Illinois. We have people from overseas, somebody in Israel, somebody in Germany now. I wish we could make even stronger hires. Those are mostly adjunct hires, but adjunct faculty with actually professorial ranks. Of course, physical knowledge of a person makes a certain, difference, but it's very important to go towards those aims. Why? Because of the opportunity cost. There are good people, good specialists, good experts in all of those areas. Why should I just want people from my small town or even from my big city if I live in one? The University of the Future. Well, getting even more controversial here. Faculty governance needs to be somewhat different because the one we have now is somewhat dysfunctional. If we are talking about a university that can really adapt to the global environment, and global environment means that you can get students or hire faculty on somebody's backyard, but they can do the same thing to you. You actually need to pay attention to competitive pressures. That means that faculty in many ways would rather have to be like research and development scientists than traditional faculty. Remember, research and development scientists in corporations tend to be very serious scientists, but they work for somebody and they know that they work for somebody, not for themselves. This is this difference between the university as a way to help professors do whatever they wish, and a university as really focused on the social roles of that institution. However, I disagree with many administrators on this. Faculty governance should go away. Actually, the best strategic planning for online education I've participated ever was actually a subcommittee of the Faculty Senate, Technology Committee that I've organized around the year 2000, and we had administrators from other campuses coming to that because it was faculty driven, but we knew what we were doing probably better than anybody on that campus. Then, of course, Faculty Senate decided that they didn't need us anymore, but that's exactly, the fun of the academic life. Why, in strict terms, do we need still faculty governance? In terms of long-term quality controls. We don't have better long-term quality controls, but they need to be very different than they are now. Now, high-tech teaching media, of course, just need to be mentioned here because many people covered them in their own presentations. Social networking, podcasting, MP3, MP4, online environments such as the SL, and more to come, but not in this presentation. Now, let's cover the second part of my talk, briefly, but there are just certain things to be mentioned here. The second part is devoted to the actual collaborations that I'm a part of to some degree. One is the collaboration of the Sloan Foundation that started after the flooding in the United States, the Katrina disaster. And we had a situation in which suddenly universities from all over the world, and especially the US universities, because of accreditations problems, suddenly started offering classes to everybody. And it was a very successful effort. Now Ray Schroeder is heading a group also for the Sloan Corporation in online education for emergency preparedness. Then I'm a part actually in my both institutions, both Warsaw School of Economics and the University of Illinois, in a collaboration in which we have a couple of classes where there are students from the US and from Poland, and we are discussing, for instance, business ethics, and sometimes we have co-instructors. It really works. Of course, it had to go through exactly faculty governance, so we had to approve the classes. That's one of the ways I became the professor in Warsaw, because it was easier for me to actually offer it than to have somebody else in a different institution. And students are very satisfied on both sides of the Atlantic. Probably the main practical problem is really the difference in the timing, because semesters start differently, but still you do the half semester class in the US or something of that kind, it works. In Poland, I'm a part of something called Econet, which has 5 top economic institutions offering 1 class each for 25 students, and they can enroll 5 students from their class, from their particular university, and this way they can have a certificate in something relatively less popular, yes? Like classes that are very important, maybe for majors, but not popular among the general population, or very advanced. It works sufficiently well. This year I'm starting a new project, which is with the American Philosophical Association, and the main collaborator is actually in Sweden. We are starting a really standard for computer philosophy and computers classes. It's based on a class from Sweden offered a couple of years ago, excellent class with participation from Thessalonica and from other places. Out of 12 students, there were 10 papers published there because it was doctoral level class. Now we are opening it up to collaborators from Oxford, from Palermo, from Thessalonica, from Warsaw, and from Illinois. And I think South Carolina is also joining us. And we are actually, since we are all kind of experienced online teachers, we are starting in a very disorganized kind of way. We've agreed to have 1 lecture by each instructor that joins, and students, some of our students will work together, some students will just join for separate discussions. It's a little jazzy, but you can play jazz when you have, I've been teaching maybe about 30 online classes on 12 different topics, and a couple of other colleagues have that kind of experience, so I think we can handle it. We will see this fall. If somebody is really interested to join in, I'm available to talk to after this presentation and the whole session. So we have the merry-go-round model, which is this Polish consortium model that can be also used for the whole general online degree. We have the lead institution model, in which there's one institution that organizes a degree, and other institutions join in, maybe providing some bricks for the whole, for the whole thing. Then we have partners model, 2 or 3 partnering institutions. We have interinstitutional alternatives, situations in which we have either faculty-based collaborations or some other general projects, for instance, EU projects. And finally, the most controversial part is beyond the traditional institutions. Frankly speaking, traditional academic institutions are mostly justified by really geographic reasons and some other reasons that are less and less relevant. Probably, if accreditation can be awarded to degrees that are not quite based on just traditional academic institutions, there will be more market. And I believe there are some corporate partners that can go beyond the university model. Is it always good? I'm not saying it's always good. I'm saying it's one other option. Yes, I was teaching in St. Olaf College and Carleton College, and those are colleges that teach like 19th century small liberal arts colleges. And there is room for it. Those are great colleges. Harvard used to be like that. I believe, you know, the thousand flowers should bloom. We are ready for all kinds of variations. All right, so here I cover those models a little bit more in detail, but I think I've covered this sufficiently before, yes? And here, one global certificate, for instance, in computer ethics, just an idea that we've been working on. We might have something like this in about a year among different institutions. Yes? One other point that I wanted to mention, it's about global equity. I've introduced now in the Warsaw School of Economics, and we are going to work on it also with the University of Illinois, when we have free spots in online classes, we're inviting disadvantaged students for free. We've just invited some women from Iran that were not satisfied with the political overtones of their home institution, and somebody from Bangladesh, and some people from East Timor, and I think we are going to continue that. It costs us absolutely nothing. It actually adds some cultural diversity, and it's a good thing. Plus, we are starting the new partnerships that can grow also in marketably viable ways. All right? So I think the internet is becoming the electronic agora that goes much beyond just the traditional distance education or continuing education. This becomes one important branch of education, and I don't think it's productive to predict whether it's going to be 30% or 60% of the educational market, but it's going to be large and solid and stable, and there is no reason to put on too many brakes because it's there, and the faster we play, the more influence we will have on the quality and the shape of that fascinating future and actually present. Thank you.